I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. Greg Hodgin, the Executive Director and founder of Peacebuilding Solutions and the ZC Institute. He graduated from Emory University with a bachelor's in chemistry and from Georgia State University with a bachelor's in history, a master's in political science, and a Ph.D. in political science as well. So, Greg, welcome back. We're talking today about American cultural imperialism. Let me start with some definitions here. Traditional cultural imperialism, I'd looked this up in Wikipedia, is making other cultures adopt your cultural norms by force, right? But American imperialism is more about packaging those cultural norms and selling them to other cultures through media indoctrination. Do I have that kind of correct?
That's mostly correct. And the nice thing about media indoctrination is that it's not, you're not trying to indoctrinate them. They knock on the door because they want it, right? This is the difference between hard and soft power, which I know that you're going to ask that question later on, but I'm going to kind of tap into it a little bit. Soft power is the idea that I can get people to do things without using force, is basically the very, very basic definition of that. So most of what we do in life is based around soft power. With that being said, every system in the world is based on hard power. If you break a law, they will use hard power against you, either economic, as in they'll give you a fine as a punishment. They will engage in temporal punishment. They'll take time away from your life. We call that jail. Or they'll kill you, depending on the crime, right? But to do that, all of those are some sort of violence. There's economic violence, there's temporal violence, and there's just flat out physical violence, right? That's hard power. Soft power is we've been trained since we were born. We have been socialized to obey the laws in our country. So it's much easier for us to do that, because if you have to always depend on hard power to get what you want, you can punch someone in the face only so many times before they're just done with it, right? So usually in political science, we use what's called carrots and sticks. You know, there are punishments, but you also want to include incentives with respect to that. And when we talk about American imperialism, do we talk about media indoctrination? Yeah, we kind of do, but we have to discuss why it looks this way, because history shows us that it wasn't always this way. Good example, English is the lingua franca of the world, right? Like everyone speaks English.
Yeah.
But lingua franca is a French term, yet we use it because we stole it, right? We borrow loan words because English is weird like that. If we don't have a word for it, we'll just steal it, right? But why would I use that? Because the lingua franca before the 20th century was French for several hundred years, right? So the French were the center of the diplomatic world when it came to the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. Everyone used French. English started out before the Normans came along, and the Normans came in and kind of inserted French into English anyways, right? But in 1945, after the end of the Second World War, the United States controlled half of the world's economy because we were the only major power in the world that hadn't gotten bombed to hell and back, right? Everyone else had been destroyed. So, including the Soviet Union, by the way. So we took it upon ourselves to reorder the international system to look like what we wanted. For instance, the international aviation language is English. Why? Because we wrote the rules. What is the country code for the United States of America if you're calling from outside the country? It's 1, because we wrote the rules. Why is most of the internet servers in the United States? Because 1, we designed and built the internet, and 2, we designed it so it would be that way, right? So a lot of these things that work around the system, when we talk about, is it indoctrination? Yes, but it started a long time ago. The media wasn't, the media is certainly a part of it, but it's not the biggest part. There's a structural component to it that has been baked in for generations into the international system itself. Another excellent example. People don't keep gold in their bank. States don't keep gold in their banks anymore. They keep American dollars. And even the Chinese and the Europeans, they use that to back up their money. Sometimes some Swiss francs, they'll have like a basket of currencies, but a lot of countries in their vaults, there isn't a single piece of metal. It's all American dollars. Why? Because our dollar is still the reserve currency of the world, right? So when we talk about media indoctrination or indoctrination, I wouldn't call it indoctrination. I call it the fact that we have used this overwhelming ability to use our culture and our economic power. And economic power, by the way, is kind of the line between soft and hard power, because you can engage in sanctions, which kind of, whatever. And also you can be like, look, buy our stuff. Like, let's just be capitalist and be free trade and all that good stuff. So there's almost like this Janus-faced two-sided thing when it comes to that, right? And go ahead, because I already know where you're going. So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, would it be fair to describe American imperialism as a kinder, gentler machine gun hand?
You know, I would say it is kinder and gentler. And it's kind of funny because people go, well, what is, I hate American culture and so on and so forth, and it is what it is. But there's so many, when you look historically, what happens when you have an empire, which whether we want to admit or not, we are an empire.
Yeah.
But we are not an empire usually based on physical force. And that's kind of the weird thing. There's plenty of countries that will say otherwise, right? But, and we don't usually actively colonize. We colonized a bit, but we didn't do that much. There's a reason for that, which I'll get into later on. But the point is, we're not on this white man's burden quest to the best of our knowledge, right? We're on this more like, we pass two pillars when it comes to American society: democracy, capitalism. They go together, right? Even though they don't when you really think about it, because capitalism is create your own company that you can rule like a king. But democracy, we're all equals, unless you're working for somebody, and then screw you, you guys show up at work, right? Like there's this weird dichotomy of like, we're all free and equal, but some of us are more equal than others. It's very animal farm kind of thing going on, right? But with that being said, every other empire in history has attempted to gain a hegemony, which is basically control over their continent, over the region of the sphere of influence. And we've got that in the Western Hemisphere, don't get me wrong, but most of them try to go for the world. We don't care. We kind of inherited this and kind of perfected it from the British. So when it comes to free movement of the seas, Great Britain, its main policy was, we just want to keep the seas open for trade. Why? Because Britain had the biggest merchant marine fleet and the biggest merchant navies, which means that they had free oceans. They made the most money, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing with us. Like, why the hell do we, the United States of America, have a aircraft carrier group around Indonesia? The answer is because of the Straits of Malacca. It is where about 25% of Asia's oil goes through. Well, but it doesn't come to us. It goes to Japan, right? And that's one of our big allies. So we protect our allies with the threat of force, right? Because the nice thing is, everyone who's watching this, I'm sure, has seen Star Wars. The Death Star, you just have to use it once. After that, just park in orbit. And you've done your job, right? But you have to show that you will do it once, right? If you're going to make a threat of physical force, you have to use it. The nice thing about soft power is, the nice thing about the kinder, gentler American imperialism is, I'll park my aircraft carrier out here. I don't even have to use it. It just showed up. The threat of force is more than enough to get the job done, because we're also using all these carrots. Hey, look, listen, just sign up and we'll give you your Nikes, your Reeboks, your McDonald's, your Pizza Hut, your Apples, your iPhones, and your Levi's jeans, right? Well, and your music and your culture.
Yeah, and I was going to come to that next, because America exerts a ton of influence on other cultures and other countries through our corporate brands, through Western media, through fast food, through American fashion, popular music, and movies, right? I mean, so we may have that aircraft carrier parked out there, as this implied threat of force.
But they're blasting top 40 hits. They're blasting Taylor Swift.
Exactly. And, if these countries don't do what we want, no Coca-Cola.
Right. But here's where it gets even better, right? Soft power is this really cool thing. Hard power is the ability to use force, whether it's economic or physical force. And since the 19th century, most statesmen have been trying to measure hard power. It's not difficult to measure, but there are some pulse multipliers and all that good stuff, right? It's usually your population, your land area, your industrial development, how much food you got, how technologically advanced your weapons are. During the early to mid 20th century, it was how many battleships did you have, or how many airplanes did you have, and so on and so forth. It's not perfect to measure, but you can get a decent proxy of a country's military strength and its hard power strength by looking at its military, right? Or the number of people. Switzerland's a weird example. Switzerland has a very small army, but you can call up everybody in Switzerland because they've all had gun training, right? So if you're getting invaded, you make the phone call, everyone grabs their guns and they're ready to go. In fact, one of my personal favorite anecdotes from all of 20th century history, when the Germans in World War II were like, what if we invade Switzerland? There's 2 million of us. There's only 1 million of you Swiss. And the Swiss said, we'll just shoot twice and go home. And that was it. And the Germans did not invade Switzerland because it is designed, like they set the whole country, so you can't do that, right? That is hard power. You know that if you go and knock on Switzerland's door with the military, you're going to take heavy losses, and you need to prep for that. Soft power is something different, right? It is the culture, the popular music. More people know who the Avengers are than the president of the United States. Like in America and out of America, more people can recognize Coca-Cola and, my God, Mickey Mouse. is one of the most recognizable characters in all of history, right? But there's other things with soft power too, because soft power and hard power they kind of are kissing cousins sometimes. Good example, Olympic medals. Who's won the most? We have. Who was second? The Soviet Union. First was the United States. We have won, as of right now, 2,633 Olympic medals. Soviet Union has won 1,204. We kick ass at the Olympics, right? Like, no question. Nobel Prizes, what country has the most? You're sitting in it, the United States, 403. The second, the United Kingdom, 137. Third is Germany with 113. Now, here's where it gets really bizarre. In the early 20th century, when the Nobel Prizes started, we didn't win anything. It was the Germans. In fact, to this day, Bayer, the aspirin, that patent is ours because of the Treaty of Versailles. It was invented by a German. It's our patent now, right? And this is where you get the intersection of hard and soft power, right? Because a lot of those patents, what they're military in nature. I mean, let's be honest, penicillin is an amazing invention, right? It saves lives. It saves soldiers' lives that I can put back in the field, which means I don't spend as much money on hospitals or convalescents or things like that. So that's where you see that intersection of hard and soft power, right? But absolutely, America, especially after World War II and the beginnings of mass media, Hollywood, DJs, the Cold War especially, and because we had our weird relationship with Britain, Britain would actually, the joke is that Britain was called Airstrip One, and it's also Radio One, because all of our culture goes to the UK. They have our language. They have similar, it's not the same language, of course. Winston Churchill put it best, he's like, it's a common language separated by an ocean, right? And there are some weird things, but our cultures bounce off each other, and they can broadcast all of our stuff to Europe, right? There's a reason why, speaking of that, the French are the only major language group that has its own academy to decide what words are allowed in or not. Because they're trying to stop Anglicization, trying to stop American words from coming in. Problem is, there's no word for email, so it's like computer keyboard, whatever. Like, it's just this weird thing. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. And on that note, I wanted to jump into the present. And I'm going to out myself a little bit here in terms of my background on this, because I studied this. We studied American imperialism in college 20-something years ago, right? And I know, I believe you have taught this in college. So, but the traditional college study, when we took it, they were talking about Coca-Cola and things along that line. And so when I was doing research for this, I started to wonder, are Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Amazon, are these basically American imperialism on crack? I mean, this is like instant America at your fingertips with infinity scroll, so you don't look away, right?
So here's the interesting thing about that. Yes and no, because here's where it gets bizarre. Imperialism and colonialism are kissing cousins as well, right? Imperialism and colonialism contain the seeds for its own destruction, right? Here's why. Colonialism, I cannot rule India, England. I just can't. It's too big. So I will pick a small minority group and put them in charge, which means I will now give them a middle-class education. I will teach them how the system works. Well, after a few generations, I'm getting kind of pissed off at what's going on. I would like to take care of my country for myself. Good thing that these guys left the toolbox already here for me to use, right? I already know how the system works. I already know how these things work. Gandhi used a lot of the British tactics against them. That's why he used civil disobedience. He was like, the British people want to think they're good guys. Let us show them that they're not. And of course, he got that from Emerson in the United States. And then Emerson influenced Gandhi. And then Gandhi influenced Martin Luther King. And so you see this nice strain that goes all the way through the world of, you can tear down the system using the superiors or the superior people or whatever in that organization. What they gave us, I can use to destroy myself. And another exact example, what was Martin Luther King? A preacher of Christianity. He used the Bible, which had been used for hundreds of years, to justify slavery, to say, no, you've read it incorrect, right? So when we discuss, is this on crack? Yes, but no, because each person in each of these little, these very vague groups that are building groups on Twitter and whatnot, using it for their own purposes, right? They get exposed to American stuff. And sure, they can doom scroll as much as they want to, but most of it's going to be the stuff they care about. So now you're building these 1 million bubbles of each of your things. In fact, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, WhatsApp, that's how a lot of people in the Arab Spring were able to coordinate the protesting, right? That had nothing to do with America. Nothing at all. That was them using American technology because yes, it's an American company, but what about TikTok? TikTok's not an American company, and it is the biggest, probably, you know, that's the biggest place to go right now, right? And so the Chinese have gone, interesting, we'll make something else and we'll use that, right? So I would say that, you know, we got out the gate first during the race in that regard, and we certainly caught up. But humanity in general, like, no one's stupid. I hate when people go, you know, there's always the old race argument of like, well, certain people and certain cultures are inferior. No, their cultures are culture. It was designed for a certain place, including ours. And part of culture is the fact that the only thing that's constant about culture is how much it changes. Compare us to 30 years ago. Tech's different. How we interact with people is different. I mean, what couldn't happen 30 years ago, right? What we're doing right now couldn't happen 30 years ago. So as these things grow, soft power, the problem is that when you use it, you don't really control the consequences of what happens sometimes. You get unexpected consequences. Hard power, when I pull the trigger, I mean, don't get me wrong, when you have hard power, you can crunch someone as much as you want to. There are unintended consequences, but they're kind of expected unintended consequences. Soft power has very unintended consequences, right? Like, you kind of walk in and you're like, oh, we have this amazing stuff. Why are you using that for that? That was not what it was designed for at all. Oh God, you started a revolt. Like, that's, you know, there's so many ways they can do that. You know, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Amazon, all these guys. You know, it's Amazon, especially Alibaba, is going, yeah, we're going to do it somewhere different, right? So I would say that a lot of these guys are looking at version 1.0 and going, how can we make this more culturally relevant to us? How can we take this good idea and make it better? I would say, because you go later on to, like, you know, Americanization of products. I say it's the de-Americanization of these products that's fascinating, because they're taking this very American thing and now taking it and adapting it to their own needs and their own wants and their own desires, which is kind of really cool when you think about it, because we get to watch it in real time. We get to see what's happening and why they're doing what they're doing.
It is interesting. It is interesting. Well, so I want to touch on, again, I was reading through the list. This has been broken down, so I'm trying to break it down as well. I want to touch on CocaColonization first. I love that word, CocaColonization. This is exporting American brands around the world, starting with, and most people are aware of this, Coca-Cola in World War II, actually before World War II, which led to events more recently, like Starbucks opening up in China's Forbidden City. That was just closed down when I was doing research for the question. Yes, they were not happy about that. I mean, this is kind of I'm not sure if the word holy, but this is a sacred place in their culture, right? And so putting a Starbucks is not the best thing there. So again, CocaColonization seems to be the best known example of American imperialism from a cultural perspective, right? Is that kind of what
I would not say that. I would, well, okay, so if you mean the term itself, yes, but the example you gave, I've got a better example.
Okay.
In fact, I've got probably one of the coolest examples in history of this. And I'm surprised, actually, when I read what you were going to ask me, I was like, he didn't pull this one up? Oh man, I got to pull this up. This is insane. So I'm going to share my screen and you're going to see what I'm talking about.
Oh, McDonald's. Yes. Well, you know what? I came back
in Moscow in 1990, right when the Cold War ended. Look at the line. Look at the line. These are people who were so used to the communist system, and now the Berlin Wall just fallen and all this stuff. So they were like, capitalism. What was the biggest thing of capitalism? It's McDonald's, right? Of course, it's McDonald's. And of course, what drinks does McDonald's sell? Coca-Cola, right? So you're getting two of your brands together at the same time. I mean, look at that line. And these are people who waited in line for bread on some days, and they're waiting for that Big Mac or whatever, right? Them and Pizza Hut opened up in Red Square, right? So when we discuss American imperialism, this is the picture I think about. This is what pops into my head, because it's like, not only when you really get down to it, not only did we win the Cold War, we won their hearts and souls, which was the point too, right? And we really won it. Now, I don't know if you heard, but because of the Russian-Ukraine war, they shut down, McDonald's is shut down in Russia. They pulled out. So they've opened up this like Russian equivalent of McDonald's, and everyone's like, it's not the same. It doesn't have the same feel. It's that culture, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's for those of you who can't wrap your head around the concept, the usual thing I talk about is, you can drink at home. Why do you go to a bar? it's the atmosphere. You know, you're meeting people. There's something different about it. It's just humans are social animals. There's a culture to a bar when you go to a bar to drink. You can drink at home, and and it's cheaper to drink at home. Let's be perfectly honest, right? You're getting charged 400 or 500% markup to go to have the atmosphere.
Yeah,
and that's why bars and restaurants make a break on the atmosphere, right? McDonald's has the atmosphere, fast, efficient. It's not the best food in the world, but it's not the worst either, right? And it's palatable to the masses, which is, of course, capitalism in a nutshell, which is why you see those lines, because they have never tried it before, right? So, when you talk about, is this the best example of American imperialism? There's several of them, right? I think my other personal favorite is during the Cold War, they would, the biggest thing they smuggled were Levi's jeans across the Iron Curtain, right? And in those Levi's jeans were our allies, the Brits, had Beatles albums in there, right? And so they got exposed to the rock and roll revolution in the 60s and the 70s because the Soviets would block the radio transmissions, but they sneak in the records, right? And a lot of Soviet bands would pick this up and all that good stuff. And also they picked up the American discontent with Vietnam, the race issues in the United States, but they were getting a more nuanced view because, of course, the Soviets were just going America evil and da. Yes, I mean, yeah, we had our racial issues, absolutely, which they used as a massive chip in sub-Saharan Africa and in Latin America and South and Southeast Asia during the Cold War. Be like, look, they treat minorities like garbage. Yeah, and that's certainly fair. And it took us a while to kind of get there, but they were still getting this nuanced picture of of that. And one of the best examples I think of this American culture, this American imperialism that happened was when Boris Yeltsin visited the United States. And he asked to go get stuff to eat. He wanted to go to a grocery store, and so they took him to one. And he saw what you see in American stores, food everywhere. And he's like, no, take me to the ones that people, the normal people actually go to. And they're like, this is it. He's like, we are screwed. There's no way we can compete with this. This is everybody. He's like, these are all over America. He's like, yeah. Why would they not be? And they're like. And that's when, was it Yeltsin or Gorbachev? It might have been Gorbachev. When Gorbachev was like, we are broken. There's no way we can compete with a culture that has so much wealth in that regard. Yeah. Now, with that being said, he also said, but you still have your poor, you still have homeless, you still have all these things. And he was trying to make the case, but you could kind of tell when he was talking, he's like, I mean, wow. There's the standard of living was just such a difference because what he was looking at was even the Communist Party elite didn't have access to that. He thought it was a Potemkin village, and it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned palatable to the masses a moment ago. I want to come back on that and touch on word number 2 here, Disneyfication. Again, you can't, well, I guess somebody did make these up, but it's a wonderful word. Disneyfication, which is commercial transformation of things into simple, controlled, and safe versions themselves. Obviously, this comes from the Walt Disney Company, which creates stuff that's palatable for the masses. So it's taking real cultural traditions and sanitizing them so they don't offend anybody, right?
That's exactly right. In fact, I would say the best example of that is almost every ethnic food in the United States. Right? Every single one that's come in has been Americanized, right? Let's go Taco Bell. Mexicans are offended.
Yeah, Taco Bell was that was the one that came to my mind. Yeah.
Right. That's not Mexican food. It's not. I mean, even Tex-Mex. It's like whatever it is, right? Southern cuisine. Like I was born and raised in the American South. I mean, I'm here I am in Atlanta. Most of our food was appropriated from slave food. Collard greens, cornbread, all these things, all that it was considered slave food, and now it's just Southern cuisine, right? And it's a fascinating thing because they're like, oh, you have this big massive breakfast because you were doing hard agricultural work for 10, 12 hours. That's why there's an obesity problem in the American South because you're taking in 5,000 calories when you don't need it anymore because we're office workers now, right? But you're still going to water this down, right? You water this stuff down, and anything that you can look at. So Chinese food in the United States, that's not real Chinese food. That's not Chinese food. That is American Chinese food. In fact, in China now, they open American Chinese restaurants that sell Americanized Chinese food, right? Pizza is an American invention, which went back to Italy, and it's a very different thing, right? It's a very, very different thing. All of these ideas and all these concepts come in, and they're like, how can I make this blander, to use a number of my friends' terms. How can we make this as white as possible? How can we make this as like as non-spicy as we can, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
real Indian food, real good South Asian food should burn your face off. Like it should burn your face off.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
the thing
it's
is
spicy.
that yeah, but the thing is when you go to like an Indian restaurant, it's usually mild. You got to ask for the extra spice, right? That should be the standard. East African food, Ethiopian and Eritrean food, things like that should also be very spicy. Caribbean food should be very spicy. But when you go to like a Caribbean jerk place, unless it's run by people from the Caribbean, it's been watered down, right? So I think that when we talk about things of this nature, we really do talk about this watering down, but it's a national thing. It's such a it's an international thing. It's such a bizarre thing because you say justification, absolutely, right? Because capitalism is about capturing the widest market. McDonald's is also a good example of this as well, right? Because Disneyfication applies to that. Why do the McDonald's burgers taste the way they do? They taste bland so kids can eat them, right? So that way I can do the Happy Meal and it's not gonna upset anybody or anything like that, right? So I can hit the biggest market that I can because at this point it's about volume, right? Disneyfication is two things. One is that special experience of going to Disney World, Disneyland. If you're in a different place and right? But it's also all the movies and the property and all that stuff and the merchandising of that as well, which is we're not going to tell controversial stories. We're going to tell fairy tales. Only recently have they gotten some pushback against woke stuff or whatever. And you'll notice, by the way, find me a copy of Song of the South. Go ahead. I'll wait. You're not going to, and you know why you're not going to, right? You know what Song of the South was, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I understand that Disney they pulled some of the older stuff that was offensive, I guess would be the word.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest.
And they're a lot more woke as well, right? They are a lot more woke. So
yeah, and because our culture has changed, right? Do you remember what the names of one of the crows in Dumbo was? One of the crows was named Jim.
Okay.
I mean, you kind of go, wait, what? And it's like, and Song of the South, of course, is like, hey, look, we're all living on a happy land and we're all sharecroppers. That is not how it looked. Like, it's this very idealistic view, which is why it's one of Disney's dirty secrets, right? That they keep in the vault. They don't. That's not one you're going to get on DVD anytime soon, right? It's more of a historical thing. And now they're putting on, at the beginning they're saying like, listen, this might have some culturally insensitive things because 40 years ago there wasn't enough of a push from the bottom to make that matter. Now there is, and Disney is not full of idiots. If you were trying, there's always this weird tension between where culture is going and where the company wants to lead you. The company can only lead you so far. If you go too far, the people stop going, right? You can walk a couple of steps ahead or a couple of steps behind. But if you're too far in front or too far behind, you lose your share, right? And Disney, let's be honest, is consummate in this, right? They're very good at figuring out exactly where they need to go. Because, DeSantis was like, oh, they're woke and da-da. And everyone's like, you're going to attack Disney? Really? When you were defending family values for Disney 20 years ago, and now you're attacking them for being too woke? Okay, so clearly Disney's doing the right thing, which is being good capitalists. You can see which way the wind's blowing, so fix it, right? So when we discuss Disneyfication, I would say it's homogenization. I would say it is widening your market share. And you're absolutely right. It is the simple, controlled, and then safe version. If you want a movie or if you want a story that's gonna really make you think and really like and cause controversy, Disney ain't gonna do it. Why would they? Right? They do it with Miramax. Like they bought Miramax, but they didn't notice that Miramax was owned by Disney. It doesn't have Disney's name on it.
Yeah, yeah.
For that exact reason, that they protect the hell out of that property, right? They'll sue. They literally sued a boarding school or an orphanage that had Mickey Mouse on it because they're like, you're violating our copyright, and we are not going to let you do that because they're zealous of protecting that IP. Because if it's used incorrectly, you lose that family-friendly value, and now you lose that biggest market that you've been building for 60, 70, 80 years.
So let me go on to the next one. And these next couple are a little bit more related. So this could be confusing, but I want to touch on Walmarting, which is the homogenization of global business using retail optimization concepts. And so this comes out of the logistics, purchasing, and finance, right? That lets companies emulate Walmart's low prices mantra. So in cultural terms, from a, I guess you would say from a foreign perspective, this echoes what happened inside of the United States. I think everybody remembers at least the complaint during the late 90s, early 2000s, that Walmart would come into a community, drop down a big box store that had absolutely everything and rock solid or rock bottom prices. And next thing you know, all of the small businesses would go out of business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these small independent stores that would support employees and pay them, presumably living wages, they're gone because Walmart has, put them out of business. Well, so the idea is that this Walmarting would happen in other countries as well, that American companies or even foreign companies using American concepts could basically Americanize these economies.
Mm-hmm. And that's the interesting thing about it. It went both ways, right? And it really did go both ways because yes, during the 90s and 2000s, you see the death of malls and you see like Walmart and Target and these other guys just steamroll over this, right? But how do they do that, right? How are they able to do that? And the answer is because of globalization, because they were able to actually source what they actually needed to, right? So for instance, I would ask you to take a look at your shirt. If you got another piece of clothing around you right now, take a look where it's made. I got 20 bucks that says it was not made in America, right? It's made in a sweatshop somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And so when it comes to Walmart, they're like, we could work with the locals, but you want lower prices. So we're going to outsource local labor to a place with weak human rights laws and weak human rights instruments and weak human rights enforcement. Pay them $1 a day and pass the savings on to you because you don't give a damn as long as you get what you want. Problem is that, of course, that means that the people who can actually buy the stuff can't afford anymore because they lost their job. And that's where, Ford was an anti-Semite kind of jackass, but there's something he did get right, which was he paid his people very well. He's like, who can buy my car? Like, if I'm not paying my own workers, I want my workers to drive my car because I want them to see, the products of their labor, but I want them to be on the road driving and saying, I built this. Look at how great this is and how awesome it is. They became salesmen. And he was like, but I can't sell it if I'm not paying you appropriately. So for him, it was this big, massive, virtuous circle, like, let's make sure we take care of our people so that way that I can get more customers. When it comes to the Walmartization, they do seem more local businesses, absolutely. But if we didn't do that, then our prices would double and people would get pissed off, right? Like, there's a cost, no matter what, there's no such thing as free lunch. The piper must be paid in some way. Now, it might not be paid by Americans, might be paid somewhere else. By all means, go ahead. I know you're ready to go.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that there's kind of a correlated concept here. And again, when I was reading through these two are pretty close to each other. It was called the McDonaldization of society, which is different than your earlier example. Earlier, you were talking about actual American culture, the American product, that experience. In this case, they were talking about more about the business principles that McDonald's uses. So this wasn't necessarily about retail like Walmarting is, but about these business processes and optimization and other things that, again, we're exporting to other countries. And so we're Americanizing their businesses. And in some ways, kind of like what I think you were hinting at with Walmarting, not all of this is bad, right? We're showing other cultures how to optimize processes, but at the same time, it makes them more like us.
It makes them more like us, but also, and McDonald's is such a great example. I'm going to show you something that is going to go, oh, wow, okay, that makes sense. So speaking of, the McDonaldization, here is the menu for a standard McDonald's in India. If you'll take a look, McSpicy chicken, chicken wrap, paneer wrap, McAloo. I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, I'm looking at the paneer wraps. Actually, that looks good.
Yeah, she does look good. Mexican McCulo. I don't even know what alo is. A chicken kebab wrap. What's missing from this?
Beef, presumably.
Beef. There's no hamburger. The thing that McDonald's is known better for than anything else in the world. There's no beef burgers on this menu. None. In fact, there's a hash brown with whole wheat. That's a thing. That's a thing, right? So the thing about McDonaldization is that they sat down and were like, listen, let's take our business model, but we must adapt to local culture. We're going to get run out of business. Can you imagine what would happen if they were selling Texas-fed beef, grass-fed beef from Texas and India? They get lynched, and rightly so, right? Like, you don't do that. It's equivalent of opening up like a barbecue shop in Saudi Arabia. Like, what are you thinking, right? Now, there might be some. You can barbecue a lot of stuff besides pork, but, especially if you're talking like Southern barbecue, it's pork, right? You can't do that. Opening up a barbecue place in Israel, don't, right? But the thing is that India is 1 billion people. That's a large market. So you have two choices. Again, you must stay at least within spitting distance of the culture, right? And so McDonald's, absolutely, they were actually culturally sensitive, not because it's the right moral and ethical thing to do, because we make more money that way. And that's where it becomes bizarre when people kind of go, and people on the far left and the far right, like people on the far left are like, oh, I can't believe it. Like this, they don't listen to the culture. Believe me, they have a team that's watching. And on the far right, why should you adapt? You should just sell whatever. Okay, you go sell a cow in India that you're going to eat. See what happens to you, right? Like you can't be on either. You can't be too far out of step with that culture, right? Yeah. And I think that when it comes to McDonald's, especially, the McDonaldization of society, the fact that we're passing these business practices on, it's a lot of them. People say, oh, United States is the land of opportunity. For them, McDonald's in India or whatever, getting that job, working the till, is that stepping stone to working your way up that chain to go work in America, right? And so you create this, and of course, this is where a lot of the brain drain comes from and things like that. Like maybe I can get there because if I understand this business process in India, maybe I can transfer it somewhere. I can expand the market here. That will get me attention. I can expand South or Southeast Asia, and yeah, you can see that happening as well. So it is similar to Walmarting, but it is much more capitalistic based, and it's much. I would say it's a bit less exploitative. It's still exploitative, but in a different way, in a more happy way, for lack of a better term.
Well, so I guess the next thing I wanted to go on was, it seems like, again, what we're calling American imperialism here is tied to American exceptionalism. It seems like that's maybe tied to it, maybe at the root of it. We don't export our culture because we want to wipe anybody else's out. We do want the money, but what we're thinking are low prices are basically the best thing on earth. Everybody wants them, or everybody should want them. And then we kind of get surprised when Starbucks wipes out little coffee shops in Paris. Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's a very bizarre thing because it's American exceptionalism is the idea that we are totally different from everybody else, that our country is unique. It was founded in a unique way, and we have a unique history. This is wrong. It's just like there's plenty of other countries that have done weird things like that. We started out unusually, don't get me wrong, but we didn't start with this fresh slate. And people think that, oh, we just came off this pristine land. There were people here. We killed them. So, we didn't just start fresh.
What's interesting though is, and I think you've compared to the United States. I definitely feel this way also. In many ways, we were modeled after the Roman Republic, and Rome also had a massive amount of exceptionalism.
Rome was built on exceptionalism. They flat out said, they called the Mediterranean Novo Nostrum, RC. Like they were like, we are the world. Right. And the Romans were so weird because one of the few statues they put up in the Forum was of Hannibal, their biggest enemy, because he got the closest to destroying them. And it was one of the few times in recorded Roman history they sacrificed children, because the oracle said, to win this war, you must sacrifice children. Whatever needs to be done, we'll dig the hole. Like, no problem, no question. They were like, no, hell no. And when Hannibal actually camped outside of Rome and was like, I'm gonna camp here and you need to surrender, the Romans sent out an emissary from the Senate with a bill for camping on public land. Like, it was that kind of like, no, we own all this. And America has this a combination of brashness, arrogance, naivete, and idealism. And that kind of all kind of mashes together in this weird kind of thing. And which I'll get into a bit later on, because we're not imperial. Well, yeah, ask the Native Americans in Mexico. Like, when you say you're not an imperial power, or the Philippines, or Cuba, right? Like, we did engage in imperialism. It's just doesn't look like everyone else's imperialism, right? We were just trying to, show democracy and all that good stuff, right?
Yeah, and and it leads to, and I could be reaching here, but so one of the things that I wonder that may be related is, for instance, in the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine, we were pretty open about arming the Ukrainians, right? And so you have what you could consider a regional conflict, and I'm not making any moral judgments about it. I think that the invasion was flat out wrong. But then at the same time, for America to just kind of brashly step forward and say, well, we don't agree with what you're doing, we're going to arm these guys, that seems dangerous.
We've been doing that for 50, 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
And the thing is that when you discuss containment, like our post-World War II strategy with the Cold War, idea was we're going to fight communism everywhere. Everywhere. Doesn't matter where it is. All you got to do is contain it because it's such a shitty system that as long as we contain it for long enough, it collapses. There's something called the Long Telegram by George Kennan, where he basically lays out this in 1947. He's like, we don't have to fight them. All we have to do is outlast them. And we'll give them the initiative. They can pick the fights where they want to. So, of course, the Soviet Union would kind of go, try to start their brush fires wherever they could. We put them out wherever we could. And we made some moral compromises that we're still cleaning up right now, by the way. And we can have that conversation later on. But this arrogance of like, we're going to cover the world and we're going to win. And then we did. Like, and that's the even, when people say unbridled arrogance, yes, but is it arrogance when you did it? Or is that just really weird confidence? Like you can see how fuzzy that gets. And the problem is that a lot of Americans have internalized that. Like we're in America, we can do everything, right? But the problem is that because of that, there's also this idea of that a lot of Americans have internalized what's called the just world hypothesis. And that is the concept that people who the universe is just and right. So good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. Therefore, if you're poor or on drugs or made mistakes, that's because it's a moral failing on your individual part. It's not a societal or systemic issue. It's on you. This is a problem because we are social creatures. And the thing is that taking one wrong step off the treadmill can make you homeless, and then you're done, right? There is no social safety net to really lift you up. And the amount of stigma and shame we give to that is insane. So, as long as you stay on the straight and narrow, that's fine. But otherwise, if you follow the social safety net, you're done. But it's very much tied up in this quintessentially American ideology of we're so independent and we're so individualistic. We don't need government. We don't care about government. COVID is a great example. People are like, just wear a mask for God's sake, right? Just wear a mask. That's infringing on my freedom. To quote Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the great Supreme Court justices, your freedoms end where mine begin, right? Like, that's,
well,
but
and,
with that being said, vaccines, we're having a fight for a century. Like we've had this fight for a century and it's the same fight every single time.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think that the moment of truth there was basically when they said in COVID, you have to wear a mask, right? Because that's like waving the red flag. They're like, you have to? Well, no way. It's not going to happen.
I would partially disagree with that. You have to not wear a gun when you go to pick up your kid from school. It's like, there are reasonable limitations, right? There's a great video that went around of like people getting interviewed about like why seatbelt laws are fascist. Because it's my car, I don't have to wear a seatbelt if I don't want to. Blah 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 blah. Right? The thing is, though, is that it does cost society because you don't have insurance and you're on life support for 10 years. We're paying for it. So there's always this tension between individual rights and liberty and running a functioning state and society. Always. The United States has always, and by the way, this is like true across the damn board. We are one of the most individualistic cultures in the world.
Yeah.
And for some people, that's amazing. For some people, especially people from very communitarian cultures like South and Southeast Asia, it's such a huge culture clash for them. Because they're like, what do you mean you're not going to take care of your parents when they're older? What do you mean that you're not going to, what do you mean you don't obey your parents always? What is this? Like, it's this very, and I'm sure you've seen it before, right? Like, it's a huge culture clash. And a lot of these immigrants, again, they have to Americanize. And going back to McDonaldization, how much do I Americanize? How much of the culture do I pick up? But also, my parents will still talk to me at the end of the day, right? Like, and all these other things as well. So we're a weird mismatch of all these different cultures to come in, but we all want the same thing. We all have this idea of individual rights and individual liberty. But the problem is that to get that, you need a government, because if we all have individual rights, that means I can just take my gun and shoot you in the face. And that very quickly leads to anarchy.
Yeah. So, one of the things that inspired this, and again, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. One of the things that inspired this is people, I'm not going to name names, but people that I have met in other countries online who say, I feel so Western, I would feel more at home in America. I feel at home in American culture. And, people who have said, I feel more at home in American culture in some ways than I feel in my own. And, when they say that, I just kind of, say, have no idea why
You
that
can't
might
put
be.
yourself in their shoes. Yeah, because it's such a our due to a confluence of technology, our military superiority, and our economic predominance in the world, we have homogenized the planet in
Yeah.
that regard.
Well, and
And
that's what it's one of those realizations in the back of my head. It's like, why do you feel more at home with American culture? Because you have been raised with bits and pieces of it to a greater or lesser degree, right? Again, food, music, movies, language, I
all
mean,
of
your
it,
entire life. And
all of it.
even if you grew up in a completely different culture, a completely different country, you were still raised as an American in many ways, right?
Exactly, exactly. And that's the thing. You turn on the TV somewhere else. You turn on the radio. Yes, some countries like you only play you must play at least 30% of our countries, whatever. Americans everywhere. American movies, American books, American TV series, Netflix, all that
Yeah.
stuff, especially with global media now, the way it is. I don't need a radio signal. Because remember, Radio Free Europe is how we got our signals across the Iron Curtain. Now it's just as long as you got a VPN, you can download from wherever the hell you want. Like it's no big deal. So you can kind of tap into whatever you want to, whenever you want to. So you can always find out what's going on in America. And America, and Hollywood has been setting the cultural standard for golly knows how long, which I find ironic because Hollywood exists because it was running away from Edison, so that they didn't have to deal with Edison's patents. Like that's why they ran, because Edison was trying to run a studio. They ran to California because like, we can't reach us here. And they built Hollywood almost from scratch so they could do their own stuff, right? And that culture that has been building up over and over and over for time, like again, the last 15 years, Star Wars and the Avengers, everywhere. You go somewhere dressed as Vader, I don't care where you are. Someone's gonna know who you are.
Yeah.
And more people know about our government and our governmental system and our democratic system, than they do their own, because it's been beaten in their heads by Hollywood media, the TV, the movies, all that stuff, right? And it is almost like the example I use is, look, culture is like a river. It flows over you, and sometimes you don't even feel it. But you know what else was flowed over by a river? The Grand Canyon. Like, give it time, and it will wear you down and crack you into pieces. And one day you wake up and you don't even realize that you are a totally different culture now, that you're a totally different person, because it sneaks up on us, right? Like you don't wake up one morning and go, I feel French today. Like that's not the way it happens. But there is one day when you look back and you go, that day or that week or that month when this happened, I realized I was actually more attuned to this culture than anything else. And a lot of people do that, and they feel orphaned because they're like, I'm not there. And
Yeah.
when you think about this, America has 330 something million people, right? And a population of 7 billion. We have 5% of the world's population. That's it. That's so small. And yet we control, like, not 100% of the culture, but we are one of the main drivers of world culture, global culture, with 5% of the population.
Well, so I want to go next to civic religion, right? Because
Oh,
one
yes.
of the tenets of civic religion, I know this is you've been mentioning this to me for weeks. So again, I'm really
Civil
excited.
religion, civil religion.
Civil religion. I'm sorry. When I did research on this, America is a beacon of light and hope for the world, which kind of ties into what you were just saying. That's part of our civil religion, right?
Mhm.
And again, this is kind of tied into exceptionalism. We may not necessarily be that beacon. We may not be better than these other countries. At the very best,
Perceptions matter.
yeah, you could say case by case on a best case basis, right?
Mhm.
It's a comparison. We don't just automatically beat everyone else. But so civil religion holds that America is a beacon of light and hope for the world. And this is something that we accept. It's tied to exceptionalism, but it's kind of its own thing. Can you describe that a little bit for me?
I can. And to do that, we're going to take a little bit of an art tour. So, here we go. Let me blow this up real quickly. This piece is called The Apotheosis of Washington. You'll notice that Washington is sitting there. George Washington, by the way, for those of you who do not know, and he's being turned into a god. This is a picture on the ceiling of the U.S. Capitol building. When people say it's civil religion, I don't understand. We deified our founding fathers. When you hear founding fathers, think about this for a second. You see it in print. It's capitalized, like God's name in the Bible, right? Like we have really created this mythology These people created something out of whole cloth, whatever, right? And even better, speaking of manifest destiny, also in the U.S. Capitol building.
That one
and
I
this
remember.
is
Yeah, that one I remember from college.
this one is Columbia literally taking a telegraph line and yanking it across the continent. And you'll see like, and by the way, you look at it now, you're like, this is racist shit. Like you see like on the left-hand side, you see the Native Americans are running like hell. Gee, I wonder why. And the white people are like, we have the tools, we're going to do all these wonderful things. And she's holding like the Bible, and there's a stagecoach, and there's this night, and there's a railroad in the back, right? All this 19th century technology that was to tame the land, right? This is all manifest destiny, but it ties so much into our civil religion, because the civil religion was very much this idea that we need to build our own mythology. We didn't have the aristocracy that the Europeans had. We could look at the king, some unifying factor that made us who we are. Like, yeah, we're all different people, but this royal line has ruled us for 1,000 years or 500 years, whatever. They've been, there's legitimacy there. We had to create our own legitimacy.
Now, do you think that this manifest destiny, do you think that this contributes to our obsession with expansionism?
Yes.
And the reason I mention this is, so the internet is one, right? Space is another. But, America is obsessed with space. And the usual claim is, well, it was a competition to show off ballistic missile systems, right, between the US and Russia in the 60s. That's why we do it. Space isn't real, but it is real. I believe it was real. It was heavily propagandized. I believe it was heavily real for the Russians. It's also very, very, very real for us. And to me, it seems like space ties into manifest destiny. We've tamed the land, right? We're out of country. So the only place to go is up. That or into the virtual environment.
So you're dead on. Let's discuss Star Trek. Space, the final frontier, right? This is the last place to go. This is the last place to be. It was produced in 1966. Where did they get that idea from? JFK gave a speech called New Frontiers in 1960, where he's discussing space as the new frontier. Roddenberry flat out said he pulled part of that monologue at the beginning of the series, the opening narration, from JFK's speech, right? And this dives into the fact that capitalism, in its purest form, requires eternal growth.
Yes.
You must continue to grow. Frederick Jackson Turner, who have you ever heard of him?
No.
He wrote something called the Frontier Thesis. His idea is that America's culture and its ideology was formed by its interaction with our frontier. As we continue to go west, our rugged individualism, the idea that we had to conquer the territory, like all these things got wrapped up in the American mythos. It became part of our civil religion, right? It became this idea and this concept that like we must have new frontiers to exploit. We must have new frontiers to conquer. That's who we are as a people. And it is through our intellect and through our curiosity and through our willpower and through our individual strength that we can tame the West lands, right? Now, the thing is, Jackson Turner wrote this in 1898, and 1900, something like that, because in 1890, the U.S. Census said, the frontier is closed. There is no frontier. We're done. He said, we're not done. Now we're going to go into intellectual places to expand, right? And we're going to go into other places to expand. And Kennedy tapped into that vein when he gave the New Frontier speech in 1960. He was like, look, this is such a quintessentially American thing. There's other places to go, there's other places to explore, right? And yes, we go up and we go out. So the internet is another way as well, right? We're still expanding. But I think it also ties very much into, it's the American mythos, which also strongly reinforces the capitalist aspect of, you got to keep growing. If you're not growing, you're dying, right? Yeah. And space is infinite. Like you can go on forever. So there's, you can go on for as long as you want to. And the internet is as big or as small as you want it to be, right? So now we've already, for once, in theory, we've met a frontier that we can't just easily run over in 100 years. It's going to take us a long time. But that also means that, on the Turner thesis, that means that our culture began to change to deal with the fact that we're fighting or we're exploring this never-ending frontier, that we're doing these things. And that, again, ties into, I would absolutely agree with you. It is manifest destiny, but it's much more of America, because America has become such a globalized culture. Now it's like humanity's destiny to go to space, and it's humanity's destiny to take the internet, and it's a global right. It's not just an American thing. We want we're such, when you watch Trek, I always go back to Trek. The United Federation of Planets is such a great XP of the United States, because they're like, everyone wants to join us. Everyone wants to be us. Why would you want to be us? We're the biggest power in the galaxy. Why don't you go on board? And people argue, you're like, we don't understand you. Why would you not want to be part of paradise? And there's a great a subplot in Deep Space Nine where like the Maquis are like, you say you're all tolerant, whatnot, but when people want to leave, you come at us with starships and want to blow us out of the stars. Like, what? Are you so pissed off that your paradise doesn't look like my paradise? Is that what makes you so angry? At least the Borg tell you they're going to assimilate you. Like, at least they are upfront about what they're doing. You're just quiet about it. And there's this nice dark undercurrent. We kind of do the same thing. We're like, what? This is global. And a lot of people are like, that's Western, that's American. That's not global. That's not me.
Yeah.
But we're being overrun. Again, it's the water over the Grand Canyon, right? Like it's tough to fight against that tide. Now people do, and they still will. And Americans fight against American culture. There's plenty of people who are anti-capitalist and all that stuff, but you're swimming against the current, and it's tough. And Manifest Destiny has been built into our country for a very long time. Well, and now we've kind of it's almost been adopted by the global Western community to be like, now it's a global, now it's a humanity thing, because now it sounds less nationalistic if we do it that way, but it's still an American value.
It is. Yeah. And it's Manifest Destiny, right? And so we go to the moon, we do it for all mankind. But when I get there, I'm going to be hungry. I'm going to want a Coke and a burger.
Yeah.
From McDonald's.
Yeah. Don't open your soup.
Yeah.
But yeah, where's my Starbucks? And my internet connection is laggy.
Yeah.
And you're right. I want to go, but I want to plant my thing, right? And honestly, there's a great Roman reference here too. When Julius Caesar was in Gaul, and he was trying to conquer the Gauls, every night after the soldiers had built the camp out, so they they dug the ditches, they put the ramparts and whatnot, they installed 2 pillars, and they put down cobblestones to be the Roman Forum every night, so they could have a piece of Rome with them every night as they went to bed. And someone asked him, why'd you do that? He said, we are bringing Rome to barbarians. They should see what it is. They should understand what we're doing and why it's a good thing. Can you not tell me of a more applicable metaphor for America? Like McDonald's, Starbucks, bam, 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 bam. Look at all these things. Look at this. This is the great thing. Is it not a great thing? And of course, Caesar, when you read the commentaries on the Gallic Wars, he's like, I don't understand why they're fighting me. Like, I'm trying to bring, I'm just trying to be the good guy. And of course, Vercingetorix was going, I mean, no, you're not. Dick Cheney and George W. Bush during the Bush administration in Iraq were like, they're going to welcome us with flowers to bring them democracy. They ain't ask for democracy. Democracy doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's going to take generations of that crap. You can't go in 2 years and just say, snap fingers, like democracy ain't called a day. Like, trust me, the political scientist knows. Like, every political scientist, like, you are making a huge mistake. No, culture's transferable. Yes, but no. Not in that way, not that fast, right? But they got caught up in our civil religion, in the manifest destiny of our ideas are universal and global. No, they're not. You just think they are, right? And that's the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, on that note, let me close for today. Let me thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of this with us. So I guess if it's okay, let me close by asking, how can our audience recognize when they're making assumptions based on exceptionalism, based on this mythos in their own life, rather than making hard, rational decisions based on fact?
Call a foreign friend and ask them what they would do. Put yourself in that person's shoes. Ask them, and it's got to be someone that you trust, not someone who's trying to kiss your ass. It's got to be someone that will actually tell you the truth, and it could even be someone who's British. It can be someone who's European. It doesn't have to be a non-Western person, but call somebody or contact somebody who that is a non-Western person, if you can, and say, this is my thought process on this. What's yours? Why? I think this way. Do you agree, disagree, and why? And then the important part, shut up and listen to them. Because if they're a good friend, if there's someone who actually wants to help you understand this, they will walk you through it as to why they don't feel that way. You might disagree with them, and that's okay. It's fine to disagree with them. Don't call them names. And you might not agree at all, and that's fine. The point is to have an intellectual discourse, and that's what you can do. A lot of us, we have this bad habit of saying, we're the best country in the world. You've never left your state. Like it's the provincialism of America is a big thing, right? Go outside your circle. Talk to someone outside your circle. If you're liberal, talk to conservative. If you're conservative, talk to a liberal. You might think that they're poisonous, evil, awful people. Most people are not evil, awful people. They're usually good people, and they, you know, they might have gone on a different path. They might still want the same things you do. They just think they want to get there differently. So don't think that they're these awful people. There is a lot of room for consensus and compromise. Not with everybody. You can't compromise with Nazis, right? But you can work with people, with most people. And talking to non-Westerners, they have alternate ways of doing that are foreign to us, but might be more effective. For the listeners who are more curious, I'd recommend Jared Diamond's The World Before Yesterday. He actually goes into Western culture, and he goes to talk to hunter-gatherer societies and Aborigine societies, First People societies, and discusses our justice system, how we treat old people, like all these things. And he goes into why, you know, we have a great deal to learn from them. But on the flip side, they have a great deal to learn from us. Like, it can be a positive trait on both sides. And I think that when you look at it as you're only here to gain knowledge, you're not here to change someone's mind, everybody wins.
Wonderful. Greg, again, thank you so much, sir.
Well, pleasure's mine. Thank you so much again for having me on.